Our subject today is a very big one, and we're going to be looking at it as a whole, the wholeness of healing. That's not an easy thing to do, because in reality, the healing traditions, unfortunately, exist in different camps. We have scientific orthodox medicine, if you like, which is one camp, and it's probably could be regarded as the above, as it were, the many sort of camps that it does tend to fall into. One obvious camp, if you like, is orthodox scientific medicine, but there are others. There's the great big traditions of Chinese medicine, of Ayurvedic medicine, which have actually been around, in fairness, for a lot longer than orthodox scientific medicine, which rather holds the fort at the moment, because it is, if you like, the sort of established medicine at the moment in the Western world. It is to understand it, because orthodox medicine, scientific medicine, clearly has great strengths and also has great limitations, and that's, quite apparent, I'm sure, to most of you who've come to this talk. But if we look at where it's come from and what's happened it, we can understand why it has the limitations it has, and why some members of it, particularly the scientists, will have the attitudes they have towards some aspects of alternative medicine. Most books, if you read up on medical history, will start back with the Greeks. Pythagoras famously said, "I came not to teach but to heal," when he set up his school in southern Italy. Then Hippocrates famously put together ideas about medicine. He was, if you like, the father of medicine. He was the first person to say clearly that there were natural causes to diseases, because up to then it was felt that, the gods caused disease. But Hippocrates is very clear that the gods were benevolent and couldn't cause disease, and that there were natural causes. And these natural causes were, there was quite a number of them. There were the humours, there were the fluids, there were fluxes, there were varying powers, there were, heat and cold, sour and sweet. There were all these things that he felt disease resulted from an imbalance from these things. And that was very much the theory that held at the time. And after his death, the Hippocratic corpus of all his works and all his teachings was put together. And then because he was about 300 BC, and then Galen, who was a very powerful figure, about 200 AD, again put together a very big synthesis. He took from Plato. Plato had this idea about there being three systems in the body: the mind, the heart, the liver, and they had associated with them conditions of the mind. He took from Aristotle the concept of logic, of scientific investigation, and with all the Hippocratic corpus, he put together a great synthesis that lasted all the way until the Renaissance, through the Middle Ages, and it was really only in the Renaissance that his authority began to be overthrown. One of the reasons for this was that he had put together a lot of his work on dissections of animals, because you didn't in his day ever dissect a human being, because they were sacred. But once the Renaissance came and the old ideas started to go, people did dissect human beings and discovered that actually Galen was not entirely correct in all that he had written. And Vesalius put together for the first time an extensive anatomy of the human body based on dissections. And then medicine started to be built up: anatomy, physiology, pathology. And at the same time, philosophy, the Enlightenment, there was Descartes obviously first, and then there was the thinking of the philosophers in society, gradually over the next few centuries became more and more concrete. They moved away from, they moved towards the idea of what we can conceive with our senses being the only reality. And once you do that, once you come down to the 19th century and say, well, actually, the only knowledge we can be completely sure of, the only thing we can be totally sure of, is what we can see and hear and touch, well then, you suddenly get rid of all the old ideas of powers and forces and life and energies, and you're left, medicine is left with the body as a machine. The soul, life, all those ideas had gone. It was left with the body as a machine. So, and that is the approach that's really held probably since the 19th century, and that has dominated the very scientific side of medicine. Hi, hello. You're very welcome, don't worry. I found a wonderful quote actually when I was reading up this from Nietzsche, who said at one stage, it is not the victory of science that characterises our 19th century as much as the victory of the scientific method over science. And I thought it was quite interesting, because science in the old days, if you go back a few centuries, incorporated all sorts of subjects. I mean, subjects like astrology and things that one wouldn't call science today, because science used to be regarded as simply what we know. Theology, you could say, was a science, the science of God. But once you have the scientific method starting to dominate over science, you're limiting your science right down, because you're limiting it right down to what you can see, touch, feel, hear, to what is physical reality. And that is going to bring some limitations with it. Following the Second World War, I mean, medicine had its triumphs, orthodox scientific medicine, antibiotics, general anaesthetics, we can be thankful for, surgery. But following the Second World War, the drug companies started to become very strong, and of course the idea of trials, randomized trials of drugs against placebo has become the prevalent scientific method, if you like. No one would be able to get a drug onto the market now without doing a proper randomized placebo trial. And this, of course, raises problems for alternative medicine, because you have there other great traditions with a history behind them, with teaching and volumes of literature behind them. But if you say to somebody, say, who's into homeopathy, can you not do some trials, double-blind placebo trials? They would say, well, no, I mean, we treat everybody differently. We assess their personality, they're individuals, and even if two people turned up with the same symptom, we could end up giving the two of them completely different treatments. So we cannot do trials in the same way, because that's just not how we view them at all. Whereupon scientific medicine will say, well, that seems a bit sort of anecdotal to us. We would prefer if you could stratify people and compare them to a placebo, perhaps. But comparing an active medicine of any sort to a placebo, actually, when you look at it, raises some interesting questions. Placebos are supposed to be inert substances. The idea is if you give somebody a tablet and you give somebody a placebo, the placebo doesn't work and the tablet, if it works, works. But in fact, placebos invariably have quite interesting and quite pronounced effects. In some symptoms, such as headaches, a placebo effect can reach 40%. Placebos vary. If a doctor gives you placebo, it's more likely to work than if a nurse gives it to you, which is more likely to work than if the receptionist gives it to you, which is more likely to work than if you send for it in mail order. And that's been shown. It's quite interesting. Red tablets are stimulating, blue tablets are sedating. Quite a bit of work has been done. Placebo pain effects can be blocked by naloxone, which is interesting because it implies the body is producing its endorphins in response to expectation. So placebo is something of a contradiction, because on the one hand we're saying it's inert, and on the other hand we're saying it has effects. Now if it has effects, it's not inert, there's something causing the effect. And what is it? It's very, okay, the scientific brigade would say, well, it's all in your mind, it's suggestibility, isn't it? But in a way, all the efforts to find a placebo personality, placebo type, have failed. There is no sort of, it's not something that you can predict by gender. It's not even something you can predict in the same person, because in different circumstances, different times, you get different effects. So the placebo effect becomes quite elusive, and yet, oddly enough, very difficult to eradicate. And I'm starting to wonder, as I read more and more books, thinking about all of this, whether it almost feels a bit like the ether, like something you can't get rid of, as if there is a healing force around, a desire in all of us to get better, which is physical. The body wants to restore itself to normality, homeostasis. It's mental. We want to get better. And this healing force is almost impossible to eradicate, and that's why doctors keep coming up against it in terms of the placebo effect. It's as if there is there a single one universal healing force that we are inadvertently tapping into in any ritual we undergo with each other about having a symptom and wanting it to be got rid of? So I think there are different ways of looking at this placebo effect, than the sort of narrowing which we currently do. I mean, another obvious example is in homeopathy, where they dilute down the molecules virtually non-existent in the active homeopathic medicine. Now this doesn't make a lot of sense to scientists. A homeopath would say, well, actually, what's happening here is that the molecule is leaving an energy imprint in the liquid, in the water. And as we dilute down, that energy imprint is multiplied. So in fact, as our molecule is being diluted out of the substance, the energy imprint is being multiplied many times, and you end up with highly energized, albeit low chemical, water. Now, as a general principle, if something has prevailed, there's going to be some truth in it. There has to be. And who knows, one day we may have some way of understanding why that actually does make sense. I think the important point is simply that we're open-minded, that we're ready to sort of see truth wherever it is. That if a tradition has come down to us from all these many, many, many generations in the past, then of course it's bearing some important truths within it. In a way, traditions are like gifts. We don't have to reinvent the wheel as a whole each time. And we should look at them, and we should examine them, and we should take from them what's true. They're repositories of wisdom, and we're very lucky to have them and to have access to them. And that's one of the things that we're going to do today in our talk, is we're going to look at what's true across all traditions and how to find our way to a model of health and a model of healing that's universal. What we're going to do now is do a model here of man, which Julie has already introduced, the idea that we are body, soul and spirit. And we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail to understand where different therapies work, and to begin to decide what are the criteria for an integral therapy. If we approach an alternative or any therapy, how do we judge? So we're going to start, let me just start at the bottom with our most obvious. We don't need to talk long about the physical body, we know all about it. It's where, as I said, a lot of medicine, the orthodox scientific segment of our great circle of healing, has ended up concentrating down here. And it's pretty good if you want a hip replacement or need something done in the forms of surgery, but that's very much the physical body. Now, what I'm going to put next is the energy body. Now, I know some of you will know a lot about this already, because you're going to have all of your own different backgrounds, and some of you will be maybe working in one or other alternative medical field. But a lot of the alternative therapies deal with the energy body. Now, the idea is that it consists of lines of force, of energy, and these intersect at certain points to form centres. And where a number of them intersect, you end up with a very big centre. And there are 7 major centres, which are called the chakras, which go down the spine, from the crown right down to the sacrum. The energy body acts as a sort of scaffolding for the physical body. It's very closely related to it. It acts as a transmitter. It doesn't itself generate energies. The energies ultimately come from above. They ultimately come from the soul and from above soul. But they come down and they are transmitted via the energy body to the physical body. It's a very close relationship with the physical body. Okay? The 2 key important points really about the energy body are, first of all, that it is physical. Because if you're talking about, just as if you're talking about electricity or magnetic fields or anything, we're very much in the physical realm. We're still in the physical realm here. And the second point is that it is a transmitter. It is really only transmitting forces that come from higher up. There are 7 major centres. There's about 21 minor ones and then 49 much more minor ones. You'll meet different terms for it in different systems or in different alternative therapies. There are different terms. The terms I know are the 7 major chakras, and I do think myself that therapies such as acupuncture and others are actually acting on the energy body. Above this level, if we have, for instance, a lot of things like the emotions, and if, for instance, we've got a lot of negative emotions or whatever, that can slow up the energy body, which will result in a state of a lack of vitality, ultimately, for the physical body because of the effects. And if we go above again, very importantly, obviously, we reach the soul and the mind. And this is another order completely. This is where our self-consciousness resides. The soul is our, essentially, just think of it as our normal consciousness. When I talk about I, I'm referring really to my soul. It's a completely different level of consciousness to down here, because it has the capacity to look forward, to look backwards in time, to say, what on earth am I doing here? How did I get into this? It can think. And really, whatever we say about animals, and I know animals are very wonderful and very intelligent very often, they don't really ask those sort of questions at the end of the day. This is where our consciousness is. Mind you, our consciousness can go down if we're going to get caught up in the mundane, and down here we can end up always looking downwards. But the soul, as it were, can stand above time if it wants to and look at everything within time. It's an active principle, which is why any form of healing that involves, or really for completeness, should involve this level. We should, for starters, want to heal. Actually, that's the will. That needs to go in there somewhere as well. It's a very important point, because there are a heck of a lot of people out there who, for one reason or another, do not totally want to heal. And I think we have to acknowledge that, because there has to be a will, a very clear will to heal, because there are secondary gains very often in being ill. You get looked after, you get attention, you get sympathy. It's all quite, there are advantages. So, but the soul is where we will make up our minds that we want to get better. We've had enough of the current situation. We're going to try. We're going to do whatever's necessary, and we're going to use our mind. Now, the mind is tremendously important in healing. Above soul, we have spirit. We have the one spirit as spirit, soul, body. The soul is individual. We all in this room, we all have our own souls. I would suggest there's really just one spirit. It's unitive. There's just one spirit, perhaps behind all the great religions. There is one infinite, eternal source of all that is. And it is from there that the soul will receive its energies, which come right down through the energy body and right down to the physical. I think I would put the mind above the body. the mind, I suppose, in all honesty, can be divided into different things. You could have, because if you look at the body, you've got all the order and intelligence in the body, in how it works, in how it spends its time restoring homeostasis. And you sort of wonder, gosh, where does it get that intelligence from? It's sort of passive intelligence. It's there. It's an order they receive. And then above that, there's our own self-conscious mind, if you like, our active mind that can say, well, actually, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to do that. So I would put the mind, properly used, I would put the mind above the body. Yeah, emotions are slightly different. And I think we need to talk about these three in a little more detail. An emotion, it comes from emotere, being moved by things. Emotions can be positive or negative. The positive emotions, I would suggest, are healing emotions. Joy, serenity, hope, all these things are positive emotions, and I think they have really important healing properties. Negative emotions are heavier, damper, drag us down, clog up the chakras, and aren't helpful at all. We're fundamentally, most of us are emotional people, and the big danger in life, I think, is that we get tossed around too much by our emotions. And you can, without realising, you spend your whole day bobbing along in this little sea of emotion. And I think we need to learn to be aware of that, for starters, and then to control it. And I think what we control it with is the mind. But we could actually say, I'm going to generate serenity, joy. I'm going to send those things out. That would be an act of soul, yes. It's true, that's important. And that really is the right use of emotions. In a way, it's lifting up our hearts. But my understanding is that the solar plexus is often where we feel emotions. Like if you suddenly get angry and you get upset, you feel it in your solar plexus, which is why in turn you may feel it as, you may fundamentally feeling it in your abdomen, in your stomach or your gallbladder or something. Because I think the lower chakras are more emotional, and once we start to develop the soul faculties and start to operate from up here all the time so that we're in control, then actually we're helping the higher chakras to open up and to perform to their full ability. And in fact, an enormous amount can flow in. There's an enormous amount that can come down, right down. And this is what health is. Because health really is when you've got all these levels all switched on. There was a wonderful commercial when I was growing up. I used to love it at Christmas time for Coca-Cola. Does anyone remember it? Where it was in the dark and the Christmas tree lights gradually come on. And you think it's, first of all, you think it's a very small tree, and then gradually all the lights come on, and at the end of the commercial there's this enormous great tree with all the lights lit. And I used to love that commercial. If you actually were to say, if you were to compare two people, so you compare some young fellow who's fit and healthy and he doesn't have any illnesses and he's fine, but he's no interest or real consciousness at anything other than the physical, and an older person who maybe has got a number of physical problems, but who's devout, who's very much got an understanding of where they are and where they're going in life, and have maybe a strong sense of the wider spiritual aspects of life. Who is actually more healthy? Because I think we're more healthy when we've got all our lights switched on. That's what I think, I suppose it's the emotions. It's also going to be the will and the mind, isn't it, when you think about it? I searched for ages for a definition of forgiveness, and I finally found a definition which I thought was quite interesting. And there's an American doctor called Lightman. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. And he does a lot of chakras and this sort of work as well. So he's both a physician. And he said that forgiveness was the application of the ideal to the actual, wherever you are. Regardless of, so even if you've been, say you've been treated badly and you think that's not very fair, you still behave as if we're in an ideal situation with each other, regardless. So you've got the ideal up here, and you're always bringing the ideal to the actual, regardless of what's happened, as it were, on the actual. And forgiveness is often actually a way of releasing a lot of energy, because it can get very bound up in holding on to things. In relation to that, actually, on the subject of emotions, I was reading some very interesting work about a Michigan study which investigated the reason, which wasn't understood for years, as to why women tend to suffer more depression than men. And what they finally came up with was that women are more likely than men to ruminate. And that is to turn emotions over, turn over why things have happened. And that they felt in the end that ruminating is associated with a higher risk of developing depression. So one of the most important things we can do with our emotions, especially the negative ones, is not ruminate. Try to let go of them. There was another study which took 80 people who had serious traumas and had remarkably good psychological well-being. Now, these people had either witnessed the murder of somebody close to them, or they had been raped at gunpoint or something. Like, it was fairly horrendous stuff. But the following recurring themes were found. They did not dwell on the trauma. They didn't dwell on it. Secondly, they lived a hard-working, productive life, characterised by self-determination and self-reliance. Thirdly, they accepted and learnt from the traumatic experience and faced life's future challenges. And finally, they had biological endurance due to their physical health, which some have called stamina.